Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be discussing how to solve a quadratic equation using completing the square. So before we begin with a problem like this, let's just review a couple of background pieces of information that will help us with this problem. So the first thing is, I want to review just what we get when I take x plus a number and square it, or x minus a number and square it. So let's take a look at the first one. So if I have x plus a squared, really what that means is I have x plus a times another x plus a. So if we distribute our x through, we get x squared plus x times a is, I'm going to write as a times x. And then if I distribute my a through, I get plus another a times x. And then at the end, plus a squared. So if I combine my like terms, I get x squared plus 2ax plus a squared. So what I want you to notice is the relationship between the number in front of my x term and the number that's in my parentheses here. So notice that the number in front of my x term is double the number that's in my parentheses along with the x. Also notice at the end that this guy is just the number in my parentheses squared. Okay, what about if I have x minus b squared? Well, let's multiply that out and see if we can spot a relationship between that b term and anything else in our answer. So here we go again. So if I distribute my x through, x times x is x squared, x times a negative b is minus bx. Now I'm going to distribute the b through, so negative b times x is another minus bx. Negative b times negative b is b squared. So if I combine my like terms, I get x squared minus 2bx plus b squared. So again, I want you to notice that there is a relationship between the number in front of my x term, which is 2b, or negative 2b, and the number that's sitting along with x inside the parentheses. I want you to notice that one way we could characterize that relationship is that this number, whatever it is half of the number in front of the x. Or another way we could characterize it is to say that this number is double the number that we have in here. Okay, so let's put this into practice. So suppose I want to take this expression in number 3 and I want to write it as something like number 1. I want to write it as x plus something squared. So the question is, what number would I need here? Well, notice that the number in front of my x is 10. And what we saw is the number in front of my x is half of the number that ultimately goes into my parentheses. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take that number and I'm going to take half of it. So I'm going to take half of 10. So if I take half of 10, I end up with 5. And then if I want to know what number I have at the end, well, notice that the number I have at the end is always whatever term I have in my parentheses squared. Well, now I know that the number I'm going to have in my parentheses is going to be a 5. So if I square that number, I get 25. So that tells me that if I started with x squared plus 10x plus 25 and I factored this, I would end up with x plus 5 times another x plus 5. Okay, if we just check that to make sure it works, x times x is x squared, x times 5 is 5x, 5 times x is 5x, 5 times 5 is 25. And so notice it did work out because we do end up with exactly what we started with. So another way to write x plus 5 times x plus 5 is x plus 5 squared. And now I've got it in exactly the form that I wanted it in, which is really to look like number 1. Okay, so let's see how that might apply to the problem that we were doing. So we're trying to solve this problem by using completing the square. So my first step is to get all my x terms on one side and all my number terms on the other side. Okay, so here if I subtract 23 from both sides, I end up with x squared minus 10x and then equals negative 23. Alright, my second step then is to complete the square. So when we say complete the square, what we're going for is ultimately we want the left-hand side of our equation to factor into either something that looks like number 1, where I have x plus a number squared, or something that looks like number 2, where I have x minus something squared. So if I want my expression to factor like number 1 or number 2, what I need to make sure I do is I need to make sure that I have the right trinomial on this side of my equation so it factors properly. So the steps that we're going to follow is a lot like what we did in number 3. I'm going to take my middle term, divide it by 2, and then square it. And then that's the number I'm going to add to both sides of my equation. So here we go. So notice this time my middle term is negative 10. So my first step is let's divide that number by 2. That gives me negative 5. And then I'm going to square that number. So if I square if I square negative 5, I get 25 positive. But whatever I add to one side of my equation, I have to add to the other side as well, because I want to keep a balance. Okay, so if we combine like terms on the right-hand side, negative 23 and 25 is 2. On the left-hand side, we now have a trinomial that should factor really nicely. So what's it going to be? Well, notice that this guy always tells me what number I'm going to have in the parentheses along with the x. So I know that this is going to factor into x minus 5 squared based on the work that we did before. So this guy factors into x minus 5 squared. And now my last step in the process is just to solve the equation that's left. So before we complete step 3, I just want to go back to step 2 for a second and just make sure that we haven't done anything wrong there. So if we go back to the background section, number 2, I just want to point out the relationship again between this side and our ultimate answer. So remember, when I have x minus b squared, what I end up getting is x squared, my first term. My second term is always 2 times b times x with a minus sign in front. And the third term is always b squared. So again, the relationship is that the number in front of my x is always 2 times the number that's sitting in the parentheses with the x here. And then the number at the end is always whatever this number is squared. So let's make sure that that's what we have in step 2. So if we take this guy and square it out, I've got x squared, so that's a good start. And then my middle term should always be 2 times this guy, and then I should have times x at the end. And then my ending term, if it follows the same pattern, should be this guy squared. So negative 5 squared is 25. So it does check out. Okay, so now if we solve the equation, notice I've got a square, so I have to undo that square. The way I'm going to undo the square is just by applying the square root to both sides. So when we apply the square root to both sides, we get 2 solutions. We get a plus and a minus. So the square root of x minus 5 squared is just x minus 5. On the other side, I get plus or minus the square root of 2. I can't simplify that at all. So then the last step is I'm just going to add 5 to both sides of my equation. So my final answer is x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 2. And I actually should have said final answers because there's really 2 of them there. So if I write them out, one answer is x equals 5 plus the square root of 2. And another answer is x equals 5 minus the square root of 2. Okay, so here's another example. Pause the video after you've given it a try, restart, and make sure that you have the process down. Okay, so our first step here is to get all our x terms on one side, all of our numbers on the other. So I'm going to start just by subtracting 71 from both sides. Okay, then our next step is to complete the square. So if we complete the square, I start by taking my middle coefficient, dividing it by 2, or taking half of it is another way to say that, and then squaring that. So if I square that, I end up with 81. So I'm going to add 81 to both sides of my equation. Okay, then on the left side, I know that this guy, based on what I did, should factor really nicely. So in this case, it's going to factor into x plus 9. Remember that where I got the 9 was when I divided by 2. That always tells me what this guy is inside my parentheses. So it's going to be x plus 9 squared. On the right-hand side, negative 71 plus 81 is 10. And now all we need to do is solve the equation that's left. So we're going to start by taking the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of both sides, I get two answers, a plus answer and a minus answer. So we end up with x plus 9 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. And then the last step is subtract 9 from both sides. And so if we do that, we end up with x equals negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 10, which really represents two solutions. So one solution is x equals negative 9 plus the square root of 10. The other solution is x equals negative 9 minus the square root of 10. Okay, again, I can't simplify what's under the square root. If I could, I would do that. But here, this is my final answer.